Okay. Okay, I will be.
We got some attorneys on too, Sal. So they were very interested here. And I heard from Judge Rebellini.
Yes,
He has a high regard for you. He said he had some nice things to say.
that's very nice. Oh, I see my son-in-law's on there.
Who would that be?
Barry Braunstein is
Oh,
up. Oh, and my son is up here too. Philip.
Philip is your son?
Yep.
He's a good-looking guy.
Well, takes after his mother. A very
All right,
attractive wife.
gentlemen, let's stand by for the Star Spangled Banner.
Lights. Hi. Okay.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light
What so proudly
we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight
for the ramparts
we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank all of the sponsors that have kept us alive during this time when our revenues are not as rich as they used to be. So we have Toomey Latham law firm, we have Louis Joe's law firm, and we have Covanta Energy, and we have Gershow Recycling. I want to thank you all for being loyal to this organization, and you're making us able to continue on. Today we have a very a very important guest, a man who headed up the courts of the state of New York. Excuse me, guys. You were the judge. You were under. You worked for Mario, right?
I didn't work for anybody. We had a separate branch of government. Mario used to think that the judiciary was under him, and we ended up suing him because of that.
I thought you actually were an appointee of the governor.
Well, the governor had the opportunity to appoint the chief judge of the state of New York, and I was on the court at the time, and he elevated me to the chief judgeship. But that was be like the president appointing someone to the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean the president controls the court, nor the person he appoints.
You really do have that distance, don't you?
Oh, yes. That's part of the division of powers, or the separation of powers that has made this country great. One branch checking on the other. That's the way it's supposed to work.
We don't do that anymore, do we?
No, we don't. No, unfortunately, the judiciary is functioning well, but the other branches of government have become so partisan that they don't do anything. The Senate will not take up a bill that the president doesn't approve. Not supposed to be that way.
I'll tell you what, I had planned on letting you speak for about 10 minutes to set the groundwork. Is that what you want to do?
I- Absolutely. I can do whatever you want to do. You can
All
talk
right,
to me.
give us something to chew on, and then we will go into the meat of that, what you have. And I'm sure we got a lot of people who have got some information on the law in the audience. So I think it'll be very interesting.
So what you're telling me is to watch my step. No, I actually, I think we'd best do it question and answer. I could just say a few opening remarks that are relevant today, I think, to today's news. I was
I'd
raised
like
in
you to
the,
do that.
pardon?
I'd like you to do that.
Okay, good. I was raised in the rural South, and I saw bigotry that is beyond comprehension. First of all, I was the only Jew in school, me and my brother, and I couldn't wear shoes to school. Had to take them off after I left the house and put them under a bush, because to be seen wearing shoes, it was bad enough that I wore shorts and not overalls. But the distance that the children, my classmates, put it between me, the beatings up, which almost became a matter of ritual because I was a Jew. And by the way, there were no Catholics. I'm talking about Waynesville, Carolina. Pardon?
Where was that, Sal?
This is Waynesville, North Carolina, Orangeburg, South Carolina, Augusta, Georgia, Boone, North Carolina. I could go on. I was in
Well,
eight.
we know that Jews and Catholics are a pain.
Well, they certainly were the evangelists in the South. I think they still are. I just tell you that as a matter of background.
Yes.
When I went into the military, I was stationed at then Camp Gordon, Georgia. It's now Fort Gordon, and I was trained in the military police, and I became an instructor at the Provost Marshal General School. I was in charge of the courts and boards section of the Provost Marshal General Center. The first case that we were exposed to, they had just integrated the Army. And the first case
What year was that, Sal?
that was in 1952. I graduated.
That was under Truman. I remember that.
Yeah, well, yeah. Actually, Eisenhower came in during my term, but I recall the first case that I started telling you about. I received a call from the Augusta Police Department and said, "We have one of your N-words down here. You want us to take care of them, or we want to pick them up?" And that was a deal that we had all through the world. If a military person was accused of violating civil law, whether it be in Augusta, Georgia, or Afghanistan, the arrangement has always been, and we have troops in 127,000 countries. I mean, 127 countries. Not good on figures.
I didn't know we had that many.
No. But we have an arrangement where if that soldier is arrested for a civil violation, they are immediately turned over to the military for trial. This is why those of us who lived with the Manual for Courts Martial and military law were so offended by Trump's granting a pardon to 3 soldiers who had committed heinous crimes against civilians. Now you can say, well, they were bad civilians, but no, it doesn't work that way. One fellow, the newly minted lieutenant who shot up an Afghanistan village and then killed the 2 Afghans who came up on a motorcycle, he was tried. 9 members of his platoon testified against him. He was convicted. He went to a appeal and the conviction was upheld. He then went to a civilian board of review his conviction was upheld, and then they have an appeal to the United States Supreme Court on a general court-martial, and it was upheld. And then he was pardoned. Terrible mistake, perhaps political advantage, but a terrible mistake. And it reverberated throughout those, again, who know anything about military justice. We are fearful now that someone could commit one of our soldiers could commit a crime overseas and be tried by that vicinage. But coming back to my first experience in the military, I received this call from the Augusta police, and I said, no, we'll send someone over to pick him up. We sent 2 MPs over to pick him up and brought him back. He was charged with disorderly conduct, defacing public property, resisting arrest. They had enough on him to put him away for 10 years. They sent him over together with the exhibit, which I still have. I don't know whether you can see that or read it,
Wow.
but it was a sign in a bus station, which was commonplace in those days, by the way. Before the Civil Rights Act, you couldn't go in the South anywhere and see either a black person in the restaurants, unless they were sweeping up, or in any kind of other operation. You couldn't see them in schools. They certainly weren't in our public schools down south. They weren't they had their own hospitals, and they were awful. Someone who was working for my father was hit by a car, and we went to visit him in the hospital. Poured concrete floors. I've never seen anything like it. I saw one doctor walking around the halls. And of course, they had a curfew. Every day at sundown, they had to be off the streets on the other side of the tracks. I tell you this because I heard a discussion last night on one of the most detestable person's show I've ever seen, and that's Tucker Carlson. I think that Tucker Carlson is a racist. I think that he's un-American, and I think that he seems to cater to the basest instincts in people. Anyway, he was discussing about a priest who delivered a sermon on Sunday, and he was condemning the priest, saying, and then he had a guest on there who said that the priest certainly wasn't a man of God because he was preaching against white supremacy and bigotry and what he condemned as a white privilege. Now, let me just tell you very quickly, we are a system.
What was his argument for being against this priest? That doesn't make
He said he had a guest on, some fellow for some offbeat evangelist. You have to understand something that maybe you understand, some of you understand it better than I, but there is a very strong strain of anti-Catholicism in the evangelistic movement. Jeffers, who calls himself the president's pastor, head of the largest, one of those mega churches in Texas, called the Catholic religion the whore of Babylon. And I won't go through the biblical reference to that. And then his buddy, A.G., who's raised a ton of money for Israel and is very pro-Israel. By the way, the evangelists are very pro-Israel and very anti-abortion, so that they expect to be embraced by Jews and Catholics. But that's not the way it's been working. At any rate, the reason that he thought this priest was being ungodly was because the priest was talking about white supremacists. And Tucker Carlson has said, quote, white supremacy is a hoax. It's not a hoax. I tell you that story about the soldier at Camp Gordon, just as an anecdote. to indicate the fact that there is this racism. And if any person tells me that he doesn't have a prejudiced bone in his body,
He usually does.
but they always do, Ernie. You see, here's the thing. It's in our DNA, all right? We have to be civilized enough to recognize the fact that we have suppressed a people for a long time. We've disadvantaged them. I know this sounds like liberal hogwash. It's not. We've disadvantaged them educationally, job-wise, and 100 other different ways, health care-wise.
Don't you think there's a great part of the white population who's getting it, and they're sympathizing? You know, how can you not feel a little sympathy for a man whose son was shot in the back with no, you know, with no weapons in his hand?
Well,
I'm a bleeding heart liberal, like.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And that's the mistake that, not the mistake, but the purposeful message which is given to a lot of people. They say that those people who are sympathetic with these things that are going on are liberals, they're leftists. People like me, I've been a Republican all my life. I was even a Republican, my father was, in the South when everyone was a Democrat. There wasn't a redneck, and I say that complimentary because they like to be called rednecks. There wasn't a redneck who wasn't a Democrat. My father couldn't vote because the Democratic primary was the election. Of course, all those people are now Republicans. But I was a Republican even then. I remember my father wearing a Wilkie button when Wilkie was running against Roosevelt. But bringing that up to date, President Trump has referred to people like me as rhinos, Republican in name only. I take that as a compliment.
Are you still a Republican, Sal?
Well,
I know. Let me phrase that differently. You consider yourself a conservative, but not necessarily in the flock of the Republicans.
I am a conservative Republican, always have been. And if you look at the record of conservative Republicans through the years, you'll see that they're very centrist right now. Barry Goldwater, and I was at the convention that nominated him in the Cow Palace in San Francisco. I went there as a Rockefeller delegate, and when Rockefeller spoke, he was booed off the stage, and that was the convention that nominated Goldwater. And we were told then, in your heart, you know he's right. They manufactured cans of soda, and they call the can of soda Gold Water. And then when he lost the election, they put a pastry over the name, and on the pastry it said, "In your heart, you know it's ginger ale." But we went through the Goldwater years. Nassau County. Let's talk about Nassau County politics for a minute. In Goldwater, candidacy decimated Nassau County. Now, Nassau County was made up at that time of Democrats who had moved here, who had become good Republicans. The Republican Party was absolutely at its maximum strength. These were the Sprague, Carlino, Spino years. And the 64 candidacy, it even cost Joe Carlino his seat in Long Beach. He was Speaker of the Assembly. So it was just awful. And then Nickerson was elected. The Democrats had every county office. In 1967, I was the last one out of the room. I didn't want to run for county executive, but first Ed Spino, who was then the county chairman, and then later Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller had me come up to Albany, and I told him, I said, if you're trying to talk me into running for county executive governor, I'm not going to do it. He said, no, I just want to talk to you and just want to talk to you. We went up there and we talked for about a half an hour. And when we walked out, there was a press corps to take my announcement that I was running for county executive. You talk about a persuasive man. And I ran against Gene Nickerson in 1967. I don't think that many of you were either alive or.
Actually, I was living in New York City at the time, so I wasn't up on that.
How old are you, Ernie? God, you're old.
I'm going to be 81 in a few months.
Oh, then you're not so old.
You know what old is, right? It's a guy who's 15 years older than you.
Well, I'm 90.
What I mean to say is that's the measurement. We speak about old people, but they're only old if they're 15 years older than me.
Well, I always say that, Satchel Paige once said, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were?
Yes, right.
So I feel about 60. At any rate, when I ran in 1967, Richard Nixon had just written an article in the Reader's Digest, which was his law and order theme. And we hired a very expensive and fancy polling outfit. And the head of the polling outfit got us together and said, look, 80% of the voters are opposed to forced busing, which we had at the time. And if you would adopt the Nixon theme, he was already preparing to run in 68 on that theme of law and order. Now, mind you, there were 130 race riots in 67. In Detroit alone, there were some 80 people who were killed. What you're seeing now is a splinter on a tree compared to what was going on. They call it the long hot summer. And so here we are running for county executive in what was a Republican county. And we were told that the sure win would be a law and order campaign. But I and the other members of the Nassau County Republican Organization felt that that would be terribly, terribly wrong. There was enough strife and divisiveness, this included, by the way, the Vietnam War demonstrations, that we should not do this. And we didn't. We didn't do one single thing, one ad, one motion, one speech, which ever alluded to sympathy with the people who were against the riots or sympathy with the rioters. So when I hear that this kind of campaign is being thought of today, I can only tell my former Republican colleagues, don't do it. Do not wage a campaign because, as you said, Ernie, things have changed. People hate the riots, they hate the rioters, they hate the looters, they hate the burners, they hate those people who are creating violence on the left and the right. But they understand that there has been racial injustice, and they look for, or should be looking for, solutions to that problem. Aside from the
I
riot.
wanted to just mention that my parents were conservative Republicans, and for 40 years I was a Republican. And to me, they're a different country at this point.
Yeah, well, there's no question but that the president has taken over the Republican Party. But we have a lot of worries now. One of the hugest worries, and it's almost disappeared from the radar, political radar for the last couple of days, is this pandemic. And without pointing any fingers and what have you, We see that the stock market is holding fast. The employment figures this morning were relatively good, although we're still some 8% unemployed. But we are in very, very serious trouble. Anyone who studies history, tracking the flu epidemic of 1918, where this time in September of 1918, the flu epidemic seemed on the downturn. The market was up 22% during a 3-month period. Employment started coming back, and everyone said, we're back again. And then in
This is
Philadelphia,
29 you're talking about, Sal?
1918.
1918,
Oh,
the
okay.
Spanish flu, which, by the way, Spain had nothing to do with it. It's called the Spanish flu because they had censorship imposed on all the countries during World War I to not talk about this flu because they thought the enemy would take advantage of it. It was spread initially through the troop ships. But Spain was a neutral and had a press. So Spain was printing stories about the flu, which no other newspapers carried. And so they named it the Spanish flu. It started in Kansas, actually. So you had this September of 1918, you had this trough, and President Wilson was saying that, we've turned the corner, time to go back to work. And then there was this outbreak in the Philadelphia Navy Yard. If I'm talking too much, just interrupt me. But
Yeah,
there was sick,
I
there was-
interrupt time to time.
go ahead.
I know. Somebody said to me, what would, you don't blame Trump for not taking hold of this, the epidemic. What would Obama do? I said, well, we already know what Obama would do. Do you remember the Ebola pandemic that killed all those people? What are you talking about? That's right. What am I talking about? There wasn't any, because he sent an army of people over to Africa to solve the problem in Africa. So it didn't. I think we lost one American, by the way, to Ebola. And Ebola has a higher infection rate than this flu that we have right now. So you can do something if you want to do something, if you have the leadership to do it.
But Ernie, here's the thing. President Trump had a choice to make. He could have grabbed hold of the pandemic like Merkel did in Germany and impose restrictions and try to virtually shut the economy down for a while, or let this thing see if it would do what the 1918 flu did in September. It was virtually gone. And that way, the president reasoned he could restore the economy, and it would be just like a bump in the road. He was wrong. He made the wrong decision. The only thing that was very negative about his handling of it is he didn't listen to science. He said he was given a bare cupboard. Actually, the cupboard was filled with ventilators, but Mike Dowling tells me that when they got them to Northwell, the rubber was brittle, and so they had to go to Home Depot to get hosing for the ventilators. And then they only had a small fraction of the ones needed. So we were unprepared, and we didn't get prepared fast enough. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I interrupt for a minute, guys?
Yeah.
I want to announce to the people who are listening the way that they can ask questions. There's a feature in Zoom to raise your hand, and you can do that on your keyboard. If you can't find the icon in the screen, you can use Alt-Y on your Windows keyboard or Option-Y on your Mac keyboard. There's also a chat feature, and if you go in there and let me know that you have a question, then we will put you in line to ask your question and unmute your mic at the right time. One more piece of business before I turn the table back to you. We've gotten some feedback in the chat that there was a topic discussed apparently in an email describing this of law in business. And so you might want to touch on that topic before we wrap up, since I guess it was just in part of the description. Does that ring a bell?
Ken DeVore, you want to say something? Did you raise your hand?
I don't think we have anybody with their hand raised right now, Ernie.
Okay.
Oh, wait, Harvey's literally raising his hand. So I will accept that, Harvey, and unmute you, or allow you to unmute yourself.
I guess, you know, in listening, good morning, everybody. You know, and we're talking obviously not about the business side, but the political side. And it just baffles me that the 39% of the base, and I hopefully I'm not offending anybody on this.
Oh, we've offended people all the time. That's okay.
I know we do, Ernie, especially Steve. I understand the white supremacy and the percentage of those 39% of the people that aren't going to change. But I have so many people that I've known for so many years that are drinking this Kool-Aid. And there's just doesn't seem to be, I'm sure they're just watching Fox and so forth. But like you say, Tucker Carlson, I mean, things that he has said, you know, I don't watch it that often, or I hardly watch it, you know, it's disgusting. But the things that he said is just so outrageous. How could intelligent people, you know, I think, you know, well, how can intelligent people drink this Kool-Aid? You know, Donnie Deutsch said something interesting this morning on MSNBC. And what he said, it's not about Trump, it's now about these people. They own it. They own what they're voting for, and the outcome will be on their head, not on Trump's head. We know who he is, but you know, a man who puts down pain.
Why don't you let Sal's
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, that's kind of like, how do you approach, or what? I mean, is there any way of getting to not the 39%, but the intelligent people that we all know, some of them? That's, I guess, my question.
Harvey, that's a very difficult question to answer, and we're all confronted by that same kind of lack of understanding how anyone could go for this. But we have been driven to the point where our tribalism, which I say is part of our DNA, has come to the surface. It used to be that we would suppress it and bury it and not talk about it and be ashamed of it and try to overcome it. It's no longer necessary, because I believe, and I hate to be negative on the president, but I believe he's made it respectable for us to show our tribalism. And that's what we're doing. And there are people who are good, decent people, very good friends of mine, who can't understand what I'm talking about, as you can't understand what they're talking about. They say that it's apparent that, well, as Tucker Carlson would say, look at the advantages we've given Black people. Look at them in sports. People are earning millions of dollars in sports who could never earn a living if it weren't for the American system. Well, how do you refute that kind of an argument?
Well, I am glad that the people in sports have stood up and protested. You know, the man gets down on his knee. It's probably the most respectful thing, showing of discontent you can have. When I did go to church, which I haven't done in a long time, I went down on my knee in church out of respect for the worshiping I'm doing. He went down on his knee, and they decided that he was some kind of aberration or some kind of
No, Ernie, excuse me. He was told, and the country was told, that this was a disrespect for our flag. I want to tell you something. I take a backseat to no one when it comes to patriotism. I didn't think that this was done to disrespect the flag, but that's what we were told. And so many people believe it. Good, very liberal people have said to me, you know, I support the movement to try to restore or create equality for blacks, but I don't know. I think that they were pushing it too far when they didn't respect our flag and the Star-Spangled Banner. So that becomes a consensus point.
Well, you gotta, if you're not happy with what's going on and you want to protest, kneeling is not equivalent to breaking a window on Main Street. That's disrespect for everybody and everything. Unfortunately, that has happened. Now, I know that some of those people were just outside, troublemakers. And, troublemakers are never part of the solution. One of the things I've written about a lot is protest and using Mahatma Gandhi and using Dr. King. It takes a lot of courage. And, and of course, John Lewis. It takes a lot of courage to be that way. I don't think these people who are violent are very courageous at all. I think they're cowards. They're not. Courage is very.
Well,
I don't have that kind of courage.
Ernie, the big problem is, well, we have a lot of problems. Small businesses certainly have an enormous problem. I don't understand why, we talked about earlier about the separation of powers. Why isn't McConnell and Pelosi, why aren't the two of them in a room with hard knuckle negotiation? The Senate, and I'm not saying it just in that context, but the Senate has ceded its power and authority to the president. And if you read Washington's farewell address, there were two huge warnings in it. One was, he was against political parties. He said, I would urge you all, if you have a chance, read the beginning of his address when he says what can happen when you have political parties, and see if he didn't have this situation in mind. And the second thing he talked about is the separation of powers, saying that when one branch of the government overlaps another or tries to take power away from the other, then our whole republic system is gone. And it's true. We have the president negotiating tariffs. The Constitution leaves that to the Congress. The only exception was in times of dire emergency. Now, we didn't have a dire emergency when we slapped tariffs on Canada. That was might have been an economic emergency, but that's not the kind of emergency that was envisioned when the president was given that extraordinary power.
Sal, when I was 24 years old, I was an elected official in a union. And it was a very large union. And my little section of that union still had 2,000 men in it. And I had to go against company representatives. And, sometimes those conversations got pretty heated. But we got to know each other. And we got to like each other. And we got to know the names of the people in each other's family. And I want to tell you something. All of a sudden, you see breakthroughs. You see where you can give in. I had people tell me in the union, you know what? You're a pussy. You're not hitting these guys back as hard as you should. And you know what? Life is not not simple, and it's not all one way or the other. So I always justified myself with saying, hey, you got to give a little to get a little. And that's what we did. So we don't have that in the Congress, and these are supposed to be more sophisticated than a 24-year-old jerk.
Well, you're absolutely right, Ernie. And this is a terrible fault line in our system. Um, when I was chief judge, we had 49,000 employees and a half a dozen unions. When I became chief judge, every county, the court officers had a different kind of uniform on. It looked like the Mexican army. So
I wonder if that could be taken as an offense by someone.
no, but so we had to try to bring all these things together, and of course it takes great skills and on both sides. But our president, one of the things that people said about him was that he had great negotiating skills. Now, I knew better because I was in the court system and in the highest court when Trump was declaring bankruptcies. We had 2,800 cases in New York County. We had to establish a special part. Now, this is during the crack epidemic. This is when we had to close civil parts because of handling the enormous volume of cases that were coming in through the criminal parts. And we had to establish a separate part with a judge just to handle the cases brought against the Trump corporations from Atlantic City. I mean, small merchants, people who sold pianos, people who provided the wallpaper, their bills were something like $5,000. They had to come into court and sue, and they went away with 25 cents on the dollar. And that's why I had very strong feelings when he got the nomination. I told my children, forget about it. There's no way they're going to nominate Trump when they find out about Trump University and all the other things that I already knew about because of dealing with him. And
Yeah, I want to tell you a little anecdote.
Wait a minute, before you go any further, Ernie, I don't want to apologize. This sounds like a political diatribe, and I don't intend that at all. We're talking about what I think fundamental problems in our government now. And forgetting Trump, the fundamental problem of our government is the fact that we have the judiciary operating with some degree of independence. It has to be independent. Separate budget, separate leadership. And then we have the executive branch, the president, with very limited powers under the Constitution. But starting with Obama, a great deal of power was taken to the executive with executive orders. It was terribly wrong of Obama to do that. And Trump has now made it an art form. I'm sorry.
You know what? I have a question that's come through the chat from Michelle. Why is the Senate holding back on sending funds to states, local government, and helping the unemployed? Doesn't that infusion of money go right back into Main Street?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are other parts of that bill that are critical. You know, we're going to have a large spate of evictions. That's going to have an enormous impact on the economy. So they're saying, well, let's stop evictions. We're going to prevent landlords from evicting. But what about those landlords who still have their taxes to pay, their utilities to pay? Some of them are not multimillionaire operations. What happens to them? So the infusion to the states to, as Biden says, he wants more money for the police, not less. The infusion to the states will prevent the states from going bankrupt. And as you said, Marguerite, that money comes into the business stream, and it's essential for it. Now, why can't they come to an agreement? Very simple. Because number one, the president refuses to negotiate because he said he will not talk to Nancy Pelosi. Those of you who remember Reagan and O'Neill, the speaker, Democrat speaker and the Republican president, they got an enormous amount done because they could fight like the devil during the day. They go out for a drink at night. That's the way government should work. But
Like,
now,
go out for a drink tonight? I'll buy into that.
You
pardon?
can find a bar that's open.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to prattle on, Marguerite, but just to answer your question.
I think it was Michelle, right? That was it.
Michelle, I'm sorry.
Yes, it was Michelle.
I'm sorry, Michelle. Uh, um, the-
I have another question.
the-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that today we are so polarized that whatever the Democrats suggest is dead on arrival when it comes to the president, and vice versa. It's become a gotcha kind of scenario. Government is absolutely not functioning. And I was starting to say, let me just finish this one thought, please. I started talking to you about what happened in 1918. When we were coming back in September, there was a slight outbreak in the Philadelphia Naval Yard where 600 sailors came down with the Spanish flu. And the physicians said, you know, we're opening too soon. But 2 weeks later, they had a Liberty Day parade to sell Liberty bonds in Philadelphia. There were 200 people who participated. John Philip Sousa's band led the parade, which was 2 miles long. And within 2 weeks, 10,000 new cases sprung up in Philadelphia. And a month later, they were stacking bodies. There was something like 25,000 that died within a couple of week period. It was incredible. And then the flu spiked way up, and that's when it became serious. In October and November of 2018, it didn't end till the end of 2019. And the hydrochloroquine of that day was aspirin. Some doctor said, aspirin, it's been on the market a long time, and they've had good results in Europe with treating the Spanish flu. And so Bayer aspirin, which was on the brink of bankruptcy, became one of the most highly traded stocks in the world, selling aspirin. The Attorney General of the United States approved and encouraged mass doses of it. And it turns out that so many of the 624,000 deaths that we suffered in this country during the Spanish flu was attributed to aspirin poisoning. So, history. I'm sorry.
That was very interesting. I do have a question for you. You have gone out of your way earlier to define yourself as a conservative.
Yes.
But then obviously pointed out the differences that you have with the leadership now in the Republican Party. So in what way would you define conservatism to you today? What does that mean to you?
Today,
In your heart.
I define
mean,
it the same way I always defined it. I believe that the states should be the center of commerce rather than the federal government posturing itself as the center of commerce. I believe in free trade. I believe in strong European alliances. I believe in NATO. This morning I heard Pompeo saying that NATO was going bankrupt until the president came in and insisted that every nation pay its fair share. Well, if we know about NATO, which was really structured and encouraged and built by this country to defend us against Russia, the 2% is not money that they put in a pot. They commit themselves to spending 2% of their gross national product on defense, so that we wanted to be assured that they have a good, strong standing army ready to go into action in NATO. So we are discouraging that. In fact, I read something yesterday, I think, where someone said that in Trump's second term, he's going to want to take apart NATO. At any rate, these things were very, very important to conservative Republicans. Now, Goldwater, who was the template for modern conservatism, Goldwater believed in a woman's right to choose. So that's not the abortion issue was imported actually by Ronald Reagan into the political discussion. But that issue was never part of politics.
Sal, I want to introduce another topic. One of the things that that the modern day Trump conservatives, or should I say Republicans, they pride themselves with filling the courts with very conservative judges. My liberal friends get a little bit upset about that. I'm not so upset about that, and I'll tell you why. Some of the most conservative judges were given the freedom to be a judge, have turned out to be very reasonable. Chief Justice Warren was an appointee of Eisenhower, and he was deemed to be a very conservative
No,
judge.
no, not Earl Warren.
Earl Warren wasn't?
No, he's very liberal.
Well, he was, but that's
Yeah.
what he turned out to be. But when he was selected by
Yeah. Ernie, you're absolutely right. The first of all, I believe very strongly in the Constitution, and I don't think that that the doctrine of substantive due process, and I won't get into that in detail, has any really strong footing. So you'd have to say that although I agree with the fact that a woman should have the right to choose, I think Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided.
Right.
So, you know.
So I want to get back to this thing with the judges. Listen, Gorsuch was an appointee of Mr. Trump. On the other hand, he had no problem flying in his face and going against him on a decision. That's why I'm not too concerned about the alignment of the judges.
I'll tell you, Ernie, I'll tell you another reason not to be concerned. The fact is that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are going to be excellent judges. They're conservative and they pride themselves on being textualists, which mean they want to interpret the Constitution as written. But I've dealt with decisional law long enough to know that these textualists, even Scalia, when the end result suited them, they suddenly read the intent of our founders differently than what history says it was. Let me give you a very quick illustration. After the Constitution was enacted, 7 years later, 2 years later, they enacted the Bill of Rights. 7 years after the Bill of Rights was enacted, the Congress passed the Alien and Sedition laws, which said that if you say anything against the president or a member of Congress, anything, you can be put in prison. So wait a minute. The First Amendment said that there should be freedom of the press, and Scalia has said that the founders intended for the press never to be interfered with. That was the Citizens United decision he wrote. But then 7 years later, the same people under John Adams and Alexander Hamilton passed the Alien and Sedition laws, which said that you can't say anything bad about a public official. Well, how do you reconcile those? You don't have to. Obviously, when these people passed the First Amendment to protect the press, they never intended for the press to be able to go after a high elected official. The first one to be thrown in jail was someone who called John Adams his royal rotundness and had a cartoon of a fat king, and that was John Adams. He was thrown in prison. Now, can you imagine when Obama was president, if Rush Limbaugh was subject to the Alien and Sedition law? He'd be hanging by his thumbs. So going back to original intent, the intent of our fathers was never to protect free press to go after public officials. But later on, they said, no, we don't think that they really meant that. When they said a press should be free, it meant that they can criticize anyone they want. So let me give you another quick example. Am I running out of time?
We were on, we got about 8 minutes left.
All right,
so-
let
We
me-
have about 5 minutes, and there is another question coming up. It is on this topic, though, about Judge and Marina has asked the question that her dad was a federal judge, and this was his major complaint, that people were being put on benches that should not be there, not qualified. She's pointing out. How do you feel about that statement?
I think that our system, and I'm not saying this for the first time, our system of electing judges in New York State has become a travesty. A travesty. We insist on electing judges, but the people don't know for whom they're voting. And they're selected, the Supreme Court is selected in conventions, and the conventions are controlled by the political leaders. So the political leaders sit around a table and they decide who are going to be the judges who are in charge of so many things in our lives. You know, the federal bench is important, but not nearly as important as the state bench. I mean, marriages, divorces, business contracts, torts, malpractice, you name it. Everything comes before the state courts. And we should have the brightest, the best, the sharpest minds going. I don't know how I got there. Frankly, I lost the county executive race, and both parties gave me cross endorsement to get rid of me, I guess.
Tell you that now party leadership, both sides, their first and foremost concern is fundraising, even local, national, every level. And I don't think that was the case in the 60s and 70s the way it is today. And that changes everything.
It certainly did. It certainly did. Anyway, let me just tell you this one quick story. In 1796, a fellow named Chisholm sued the state of Georgia because Georgia, he was from South Carolina, Georgia owed him money from the Revolutionary War. And they say, well, wait a minute, we're a United States now. You can't have a citizen of one state suing another state. And the Supreme Court said, yes, they can. There's no prohibition. And so Chisholm got a judgment against the state of Georgia. The people in this country were so outraged that they passed the 11th Amendment, which people lose sight of. The 11th Amendment said that a citizen of one state cannot sue another state. Very simple. It's one sentence. The citizen of one state cannot sue another state. Well, then this country passes recently the Americans for Disabilities Act. And in the Americans for Disability Act, it says that a citizen of a state can sue his own state. There's no constitutional prohibition against that. Goes up to the Supreme Court, and Scalia writes a decision based on an earlier Rehnquist dissent, which says that although the 11th Amendment says that a citizen of one state cannot sue another state, we now read it, listen to this, we now read it to say that a citizen of one state cannot sue his own state unless he goes through the Court of Claims. So they not only didn't follow the intent, they didn't even follow the text. They didn't follow the text. And yet we say that's the kind of judges we want. We don't want judges who legislate. But there are some cases where, because of the changing of times, the changing of science, I wrote a decision which overruled a Cardozo decision. I mean, you know, talk about, courage. But that decision dealt with a horse and buggy concept. We weren't using horse and buggies when I wrote the decision. So this happens when precedence shifts, reflecting our morality, our sense of justice, and changing times. But basically, it should have a fundamental foundation in the legislative enactment or in the Constitution?
Guys, we're just around 10 o'clock.
Yeah,
No.
we're close.
Yep.
I say 9:55, but
Oh, I have 9:59. Your clock is not right, Ernie.
well, it's on my computer, and they never lie.
Well, anyway, it's 9:59.
Sal, I want to thank you for taking part in our discussion today. I think we got to know you a little bit better, and I'm very happy to see that you're in good health at 90 years old. And
That's because I'm not standing up, but thank you. Thank you.
we really appreciate it. We appreciate our sponsors for making all this happen too, and Frank and the staff, Marguerite and Ken. Thank you all. Next
Ernie,
time,
you want to mention the September 25th agenda? I have it on the screen.
Martin Cantor is going to be our. He's director of Long Island Center for Socioeconomic Policy, and somebody I disagree with all the time and have a lot of laughs with as well. He's a good man. We look forward to having him. And I want to thank all of the people who tuned in today, because the more we disseminate ideas and with important speakers, the better off we are as a community.
And one more piece of housekeeping. Zoom apparently is changing their policy that they will be requiring passwords for all meetings. So I believe starting September 25th, we'll tell you the password in the email and then the other information, but you will be required to have some kind of a password. We'll probably make it something simple, like LIMBA. I don't know what the length is. We'll make it simple, easy to remember, and just be on the lookout for it.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Thank you, everybody. And look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thank you very much, Ernie.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.